Good afternoon and welcome to a very special interview show of The Prode. Balochistan issue has been in much of a public eye since the last many years, especially if the human rights issue is concerned. On the other hand, the insurgency in Balochistan by the Baloch nationalists against the government of Pakistan is also at its peak. Joining me today from London to talk about the Balochistan crisis is renowned geopolitical analyst Mr. Burzine Waghmar. Burzine is a member of the Center for the Study of Pakistan, SOAS South Asia Institute, London Middle East Institute, and the Center for Iranian Studies. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Shandilya, for inviting me to the Prode.
Yeah. So I would like to begin the discussion by asking that could you please take us through the history of Balochistan to start with?
Well, Balochistan is a complex cauldron, and that's putting it mildly. Of course, in one sense, you can say all of Pakistan is complex because Pakistan is not your average country as one conceives it to be. Like Israel, it is a state or an artificial state predicated on religious nationalism, as some of your viewers would know. And there are other factors too, which make it entirely unique in its geopolitical setting as such. But putting that aside, we have the component of Balochistan to discuss at hand today, which is the largest province of Pakistan and concomitantly the most impoverished as well. And it's at the bottom rung in every and any social indicator one deploys. It's also the least populated for a country otherwise which has a very healthy, fertile, galloping rate. It is one part of Pakistan where the Muslims who tend to have a higher birth rate, although it is considerably going down universally across the Muslim world, in Balochistan it has always been very low. Due to a variety of factors, the aridity and inhospitable climate, the sparse resources, at least agricultural resources, I'll come to the other ones later, natural ones, and so many factors that have militated against its development. A word is in order here when mentioning Balochistan, which means literally the land of the Balochis, the tribe who speak Balochi, or rather the tribes, the 18 tribes that constitute the inhabitants, the original inhabitants who are domiciled in what is Balochistan. Balochi is an Iranian language, and it's by an extension an Indo-Iranian language. It's not an Indo-Aryan language, which Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, etc. tend to be. Like Pashto also, which is spoken in Pakistan, it's an Iranian language. And the inhabitants share features with the Iranic world at large, ethno-linguistically, although they do tend to share some features with what is considered once the South Asian or the population of the SAARC countries, India and Pakistan. That's one point. Point number two, when I say Balochistan, I also mean in a traditional sense, the area that is Balochistan. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean the entire expanse of territory which is in not only modern Pakistan, but also in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The province and its namesake spills over there. And in Iran too, it is the largest province by landmass. There too, also, interestingly, it is the most impoverished province. And on every social indicator of the Islamic Republic, it falls short compared to other provinces of Iran. What makes it stand out there as a sore thumb is that it is Iran's predominantly Sunni province. And that factor brings in the sectarian aspect into sharper relief, with what you have is an unabashedly Shia theocracy calling the shots in Tehran since 1979 and the Islamic Revolution and the collapse of the Pahlavi monarchy. And the Baloch population clearly feel the heavy hand of the Ayatollahs, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And they look askance at the regime in Tehran, and of course, the regime in Islamabad too. So that is what needs to be said by what is Iran in Balochistan and Pakistan Balochistan, but I shall concentrate on the latter. Incidentally, when one says Azerbaijan, there is an Iranian Azerbaijan province, but there was also the Soviet Azerbaijan SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic, which became an independent entity in 1991, along with the other states that became the Commonwealth of Independent States. So that also needs to be brought into just passing perspective, that you have the Azeris who are spilled over into two regions, like the Balochis in this case. So that's so much for the introduction of Balochistan.
Yeah. So, what is the root cause of the Balochistan independence movement, and what are the factors contributing to it, be it in in Pakistan or in Iran?
In both provinces, it's dissatisfaction with the center, because the center has treated it very, very disparagingly in terms of resources that have been allocated, in terms of inclusivity of the indigenous population as part of the public sector employment opportunities, the armed forces and the like. So let's talk about the Pakistan one. After the 2008 elections, which took place in Pakistan, the Election Commission of Pakistan discovered in 2011 that 65% of the votes cast in 2008 were fake. What do I mean by that? I mean by that you have a population which is underrepresented and underpopulated in a province, but with other Pakistanis jostling and calling the shots there too, encouraged by the federal administration in Islamabad. 40% of Balochistan is Pashtun-speaking Afghans, to say nothing of Punjabis too, who constitute the main white-collared middle class, who run the bureaucracy, and pretty much most of Balochistan. Barely 600 odd Baloch youth sometime in the mid-2000s were inducted into the Pakistan Army as young inductees, compared to, say, other provinces. So, and all of this is compounded by also the fact that in 1953, gas was discovered in Balochistan, which from 64 started flowing to other provinces, and as you can imagine, primarily to Punjab and the metropolis of Lahore, which granted is a densely populated province where demands are greater, true, but that does not mean that the rest of all of Balochistan, which is 43% of Pakistan's landmass, does not necessarily need natural gas and accruals thereof of such revenues. The center has consistently not paid Balochistan its dues for these gas rents. If anything, Islamabad is in arrears to Quetta when it comes to apportioning payments. Then there is the question of gold and copper deposits in Balochistan, to the tune of at least $500 billion. They have been discovered and are excavated primarily first by the Australians from the early 80s, and now by the Chinese. And again, there is nothing to show for itself in a province where, like I said, where say, for example, I was thinking of this example to cite for you, which is the hottest province where temperatures, and we've just had an awful summer across South Asia, where temperatures go up to anything like 52 and 53 Celsius across the Balochi hinterland. And there are 4 desalinization plants in the provincial capital of Quetta. All 4 are on the blink, not working. That gives you an idea how things are. Okay. Then there is the Gwadar port, and that brings us to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, where the corridor terminates, as it were, on the coast of Makran and the Arabian Sea. The port has been leased to the Chinese for a good 40 plus years. It's pretty much a white elephant, just as Hambantota tends to be for the Sri Lankans, who now are only discovering to their peril what it was to be in hock to the Chinese. Which is not to say Pakistan has not realized it. At least thinking intelligent Pakistanis have woken up to the fact, and some of the figures are eye-watering to say the least. And as I speak here, Beijing wields 28% of Islamabad's external debt. And we are only in the second phase of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Early harvest projects, at least some of them have been done. We are now in what may be considered the first phase of the second period, and it's actually stymied now, since there have been differences between Beijing and Islamabad. that have come up, and the Chinese are not willing to fund further stuff on certain aspects. And of course, Islamabad, at least under Imran Khan, wasn't very comfortable with passing everything as Nawaz Sharif was, which of course was his brainchild back in 2013 in conceiving and proposing this corridor.
Yeah.
Balochistan has nothing to show for itself, since most of the accruals will come to Punjab and some to Sindh. Even in the Northwest Frontier Province, now known as KP Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, there have been agitations that the accruals, the trickle-down effects of the corridor are not exactly evidenced. You have a spanking new metro subway line in Lahore, but what you have in Peshawar or in Quetta, I mean, as I just mentioned, there are water issues in Quetta, to say nothing of other aspects of literacy, sanitation, health facilities, and the like.
Yeah.
So that's where we stand with things in Balochistan.
Okay, so
Yes.
you mentioned about the Chinese involvement in the Balochistan issue. So how do you see the recent developments, especially the power shift that has happened in the Pakistan, and how do you compare it with what happened in Balochistan? Like, do you think that in the new government, the China-Pakistan economic corridor will flourish, or the work is not going as decided?
It will not go as planned. It is the situation will compound. And may not get better, because as Pakistan needs, as debt servicing on the debt in itself takes its toll on Pakistan. At one count, the debt servicing was given at about a good $3 billion. And this is only the servicing aspect that I'm referring to, not the debt, which is accruing in any case and mounting. One doesn't know how it will pan out, but it's not going to be very comfortable for Pakistan. And I don't know if Beijing knows how it's going to see the end game through. It has reservations about Pakistan, which it voices privately, not publicly, because for public consumption, of course, we are told Sino-Pakistan ties are sweeter than honey and higher than the Himalayas, and rhetoric is cheap, but then rhetoric everywhere in the world is, and action isn't. But privately, Beijing is skittish about dealing with Pakistan, because it does find it an unreliable partner insofar as you have terrorism attacks. Chinese nationals and Chinese engineers attacked in Balochistan, Chinese consulate in Karachi, Chinese engineers in the Northwest Frontier Province. And these have not been isolated incidents, nor have they been daily incidents, but they have been consistent, frequent incidents, conspicuous incidents involving attacks on preconceived attacks on Chinese nationals. So there is something to be said for that, and Beijing is not comfortable about it. It does push Islamabad into a corner to take action on it. With the Lal Masjid incident about a decade ago in Islamabad, if you remember, which started off with Chinese massage parlors and Chinese masseurs being arrested by some of these fundamentalists, it was Beijing who put pressure on Musharraf. And let it be said and noted that no Pakistan general can turn a deaf ear to Beijing when it asks them to pick up the phone and talk and act on something which it demands. A Pakistani general or anyone down the rung may ignore the Americans, as they always have been, or the British and other Western capitals, and put out rhetoric that they are acting on combating terrorism and containing militants and the like. But there is action when it comes to China. They cannot afford to lose China as a partner and as a strategic ally, since they have so very few to go with. As I've always said in my previous talks elsewhere, and this is something for your viewers to realize, Islamabad will never turn a deaf ear and will never ignore Riyadh and Beijing, both of whom have massive leverage with it. And Islamabad will do what it's told in most cases when it comes to both of these powers. It cannot afford to decline their requests or demands, actually, come to think of it. Okay. Coming back to the elections that you mentioned, which have to take place by October 2022, or even before, once the monsoon session of Parliament commences, after 60 days and the like, since we are in a caretaker administration just now, Balochistan's situation is not going to exactly improve. It's going to be more of the same. That brings me to another aspect which I feel merits highlighting. In February 2018, two reporters from the Financial Times, Farhan Bukhari and Kiran Stacey, had a scoop, which was only carried by the FT and nowhere else in the English-speaking world or other presses elsewhere, that the Baloch militants or nationalist rebels are in talks with Chinese authorities. Now that's quite something if you think about it. But what that report went on then to discuss in length is this, that these talks, this was mentioned on 19th February 2018 in the Financial Times, have been going on for the last 5 years. That's point number one. And point number two, the talks are directly between the Baloch militants or these assorted Baloch nationalist groups agitating for secession or even outright independence from Pakistan, and the authorities in Beijing, without Islamabad being present in the room. And like I said, it's a scoop, it's a complete scoop, because the Pakistani official quoted in that story said that we are not privy to these talks occurring in a third location, not in Pakistan. But so that means the Chinese would have used their typical payoff and buy-off tactics to quell the situation, which is what the Chinese think always works, two for the price of one sort of attitude that they tend to have. But it's obviously not worked in Balochistan, as we can tell, because of the most recent attack on Chinese language instructors in Karachi. And like I mentioned, the Chinese consulate attack also, which took place in Karachi a few years ago. Yeah. And this was so much for talks. What were they talking? What was achieved? And what was even prearranged or decided upon? Clearly nothing. So the Baloches are not sellouts. And the Chinese are going to face even further problems. Yeah. There was some point of the People's Liberation Army maintaining a standing force in Pakistan to preserve the corridor, up and down the entire corridor, which runs through the length of Pakistan, if one starts at Balochistan, the Arabian Sea, up to Gilgit-Baltistan and the border where Xinjiang commences. But General Rahil Sharif shot that idea down because it would be too sensitive to have foreign boots on ground. And he committed to raising two divisions, further divisions, to secure the corridor. But it's still to be seen as to how it plays out.
Yeah. So how do you see and analyze the role of Pakistan's deep state and Pakistan army in the Balochistan crisis? And could you please take us through the human rights issues that are happening in Balochistan and how it is linked with the Pakistani army?
Let's start with the Indian deep state. All countries have deep states, incidentally, so there's nothing spectacular about India or Pakistan having or not having. And let's say this, actually, I would like to reply with this. The allegation is made, at least it was publicly first made in July 2015 by Chief Minister Sarfaraz Bhakti of Balochistan, that the Indian intelligence agencies, R&AW, Research and Analysis Wing, and other Indian forces were fomenting trouble in Balochistan. That was made as a claim without further evidence given, which India tends to do in the Kashmir factor with weapons, militants training and the like, which India tends to show to the world, that the trail leads back to Pakistan's and ISI-run terror camps and the like. This was just an assertion made by Chief Minister Bhakti, and he didn't back it up, as I said. But then you have the former ISI Director General, Lieutenant General Asad Durrani, who is on record in a publication, and this is the ISI chief, no less, the man who knows everything about Pakistan, or at least is supposed to know what everything happens in Pakistan, stating in that book, in his work, that there is nothing to suggest that there is the Indian hidden hand involved in Balochistan's problems. I'm not going to discuss or debate, much less dispute, what a Pakistani intelligence chief knows, since clearly he is more in the know of things than I could possibly ever be sitting here in England. Why should I dispute what he has to say? And when he states it so explicitly. that there is nothing to do with India and everything to do with us due to domestic discontent with our own population, Baloch population, and this is how it's panned out, given that there have been 4 insurrections that have taken place since Balochistan's accession in March 1948 to Pakistan. So, like I said, and I need to get this across, Mr. Shandilya, why in God's good name would I argue and fight with the Pakistani intelligence chief when he explicitly states this in black and white and dispute that he is wrong and that he's perpetuating falsehoods? According to him, India has nothing to do with this. It is clearly to do with Pakistan, which brings me now to answer you directly to what you asked about the Pakistani deep state. Musharraf rigged the 2002 elections. So I'm coming now to the latest crescendo of insurrection that commenced. I mentioned about the other 4 during Pakistan's 75 years. Problems occurred with Musharraf coming in after, of course, October 99 with the coup, as you know. But in 2002, he rigged the elections in Balochistan. It's instructive here to note, might I digress momentarily, that it was the elections rigged in Jammu and Kashmir in 1987 that set the spark for problems in the Jammu and Kashmir Valley from July 1989 onwards. And it's been there since then, festering as an issue. The flashpoint were rigged elections, which led to dissatisfaction with the local populace in Jammu and Kashmir, and now again here in Balochistan. And both times the administration, in that sense, it was Rajiv Gandhi's Congress administration, which was responsible in cahoots with the local Abdullah family as such. Here, Musharraf rigged the elections, and then he started implementing legal framework clauses, which ostensibly would have given the province decentralizing features and privileges to quell Baloches, but it was insidious, to say the least, in that the very features were tar-brushed as decentralizing features for local autonomy, but were anything but that. It was done to bring in, to tighten the reins on the province and to have the Punjabi element with the local population, in the provincial population, have a greater say in matters, along with the Pashtuns, and sideline the Baloches. And that was the flashpoint which led to problems, and then the assassination of the Sardar, the tribal chief, and Musharraf boasting on record that don't think this is a replay of 1973 under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and that you can get away with it, which they did not, because that insurrection was bloody too between 1973 and 1977. To which the Shah of Iran contributed by giving Pakistan Air Force Apache helicopters and weapons to take out the Baloch rebels, because the Shah didn't want spillover effects of a seceded Balochistan with his own province of Balochistan that I mentioned at the outset of the program too. And that's why I mentioned that it's such a complex cauldron with so many issues and wheels within wheels occurring. Musharraf set off the ball with all these problems, and then there would have been some modus vivendi between the tribal chiefs and the center, which has happened in the last 75 years when they've been bought off or been pacified at times. But it could not be done in this particular instance, because in 2005, as you know, the rape incident, a local Balochi doctor, a female physician, was raped by a Pakistani army captain. I believe he's a Punjabi or Pashto or some such thing. He wasn't a Baloch. Regardless of what he was, the rape occurred and nothing was done about it. And in a traditional patriarchal Muslim society like this, with only 43% literacy and traditional mores, you can imagine how that went down, with notions of face and honor. The center didn't act on it. The military did not, and they dragged its feet on it. So that was the spark, and that cornered some of the tribal chiefs that they could not afford to lose face with their own population and be seen to have struck some deal with the center to quell things over until when the next problem occurs as such, which is how things tend to play out and fester. Because of this rape incident, it couldn't. And it's been going on since. And what has now been done by Musharraf, which was not done earlier, not even by General Zia with his carrot and stick policy in the 1980s, not even by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 70s, but this kill and dump routine, which has led to the disappearances that we keep talking about, and have been noted by UNHCR Human Rights Commission reports, some of which I've contributed to, but also by the Pakistan National Human Rights Commission, which is the apex body within Pakistan, to its credit, has gone and stated this without fear or favor. And of course, it hasn't gone down well with the powers that be and the Pakistani deep state. And this was what Zohra Yusuf, who was the chairwoman some years ago, stated, that there is a tendency to paint the Baloch situation to sketch it in such a way for international consumption by showing it to be a sectarian issue and to show it as one of local militancy, where the center is supposedly combating obscurantist elements, which is complete hogwash, because it is the center's deep state and the federal domestic agencies, including the ISI, and the provincial Baloch constabulary, who are fomenting trouble by setting up, by murdering not just the beleaguered Hazara Shia minority within the province, but also regular Sunni Baloches. The kill and dump routine that I referred to a moment ago, leading to some 14,000 deaths, mutilated corpses and cadavers. I have yet to find, in the Jammu and Kashmir scenario, thinking of India again, corpses with feces stuffed in their mouth, human feces. But you do find that in Balochistan. Half-burnt cadavers are found by distraught relatives who cannot find missing relatives for weeks, if not months on end, and then discover them in their gruesome state that they are, and in some instances with human feces stuffed in their mouth. This is not something you find in Jammu and Kashmir. This is not something you find in Elam when the Sri Lankan civil war occurred from the 70s up to 2000 as we know it. There were atrocities occurring, no doubt about it, but not of this particular nature and feature that I've just pointed out, that is a feature of the Pakistan Army and its modus operandi.
Yeah. So I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that what is the way forward for Balochistan and what, according to you, could be a possible solution to the crisis?
You can say that Islamabad has successfully decimated the Baloch population who are in Balochistan by quelling them or buying off some elements as they have, and there is a provincial government running as we speak. And when I said at the beginning of the program that we have an underpopulated region, it's also because since like other expatriates across South Asia, the Baloch have left in droves for the Persian Gulf, since there was nothing to do in an impoverished, inhospitable climate region like Balochistan. So with the departure of a massive Baloch population across the Persian Gulf sheikdoms in Saudi Arabia, you have a quelled population at home. So you don't exactly have a literate, articulate middle class to lead a nationalist revolt, or even to, if not even a revolt or secessionist movement, to seek political reform and changes. You don't see that happening because the military has completely called the shots and decimated every and any semblance of opposition with its, as I said, kill and dump ruthless routine.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir, for your time. Really a pleasure hosting you. And thank you so much for highlighting this important issue. And I'm sure the situation in Balochistan will get well soon.
Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.